indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everybody. Nice to see you here this afternoon to join us. It is a work session of the school board. So though there is no formal action taken on any of the agenda items, we will approve the agenda and then move forward with the rest of the discussion of the items that are part of the work session agenda, if that makes sense. So roll call, those who are in attendance, and then agenda approval, and as I said, I will take a motion to approve that.
Second.
Motion by Bob Jensen, second by Scott. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, and we will have an open forum time next, and I have a request from one person so far. If there's anybody else, we could entertain those requests also for a few minutes. So first I'll call on Mr. Ken Stone.
The question I have is, how much do these referendums cost the taxpayers from start to finish, paying ICS, whatever is all involved, the consultant, the builder, just the total cost of the referendum. People ask me that, I have no clue. So I better get it straight from you people instead of guess at it.
Okay, put that in the form. I'll be a request, that would be public information, so you could get that going through the district office.
Okay.
It's not a number that we just have off the top of our heads, but the district office would be able to get it to you.
Ballpark it.
No, we don't ballpark it.
So each one is different depending on, is it a standalone election, is it run with other ones? They're all over the board. I remember, we've asked the same question over the last meeting, the meeting before that, of what that cost was. I will say that one, 11,000 rings a bell in my head, but I don't know if that was all of it or part of it. And that's just what I'm saying. I don't want to put out any other numbers, too. But we've had those same questions, and we look at all that. But to get things done, there's a cost. Nothing in life is free. We have to do it and take a look. But each type of vote would be different. Each type of service would be different. So, but yeah, put that into request, and all that can be pulled up. It's certainly readily available, just not readily available sitting in front of us in our packets.
Okay. That's good to know. So sure, Kelly can help me out with
that. Somebody will be able to pull it together for you if you would put it in the form of a request. Yes.
Where do I get the form? Up to the district office?
I said put it in the form of a request. Just stop in the district office and they will call.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else?
There was
Mr. Nelson?
Well, there was a gentleman that reached out to me, community member, and was hoping to come today, but he just wanted me to bring a letter to you. It was something he wanted to read about for him.
Do you want to read it for him, or would you rather not? Or you just...
He just asked me to give it to you, so.
Okay. Appreciate that. Everybody's okay with that? We can do it later, or does somebody want to share it now? Yes.
When there's a second open forum, we could put it in there.
All right. So noted. Thank you. Anybody else to address the board at this time? Okay, we will move into the next item, number 3 on the agenda. Sub-consultants and facility staff to present reports, findings, and recommendations for existing high school facilities. Just to briefly bring us again to where we are or why we're here tonight. Our space issues with the high school, 7 through 12, are ongoing. We're still looking for the best way to resolve those. And so what has been happening is continuing to assess the needs of this building. And we have some people here tonight that will present or provide information from their point of view as people in those areas, from their point of view as experts in the field or in their area, let's just say. The school board, or the school board has a subcommittee, Buildings and Grounds Committee, that has also met, and just, I think in general, the conclusions that we continue to draw as a school board is our needs haven't changed, and we're basically just looking for a resolution to how to best meet those needs for everybody concerned, so.
Can I add into that, just as from
Yes.
the Buildings and Grounds
Yes.
Committee, we're really not looking at a resolution, we're looking at a first stage, at a little bit of what we can address, knowing that we're gonna be in this building for a couple of years, even if a referendum passes, to improve the quality of education here for the students and then the working environment for our staff in the building. So this is just the tip of the iceberg of what this building would require to even look at educational adequacy, and this is, it's far down the line yet, so.
Scott?
And to go on with that, I'm saying, yeah, with the safety and security of it, and to know so we can have as specific of information as possible, because people have questioned different things. Again, just like, Kenny, it was a good question of how much our things cost. Well, the deeper you go in, different things, cost money. And there's things that we don't know. We have to go get professionals to take a look to see what are we dealing with. And that was part of our Buildings and Grounds Committee. We've met a few different times. And so I'm anxious to see what everything over the past couple of weeks here, that Jeff and Vaughn and the other guys are able to pull together using, those contexts. What does the fire marshal say? What is required depending on how much dollars we spend? When do we reach that threshold that, okay, it's no longer grandfathered in. Now, if you do A, you've got to do B. Not by choice, you just have to. So I'm interested in finding that out.
Will these numbers, or the slideshow, or the numbers be available like in a handout, or, you know what I mean? Like, so
You're getting
people-
this as
Yeah.
fresh
We have
as
never
we're
seen this
getting it,
either.
so.
Okay.
So that's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
We'll see what we get.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're not talking a lot of cosmetics here.
Yeah.
Just point of information to, oftentimes people will take a drive-by, or as they drive by this building, and glance over it and try to see how there could possibly be so many needs. You come in the main doors, either here or over by the high school office, and enter the corridor, and your first thought might be, well, this building looks plain and bright and nice enough. But we're talking about more infrastructure things, or a lot of getting down into the real nuts and bolts, the mechanics of a building that is of this age and with this many additions. And so you've got to get beyond the front doors or beyond the hallways here on the main level and just see kind of what we're dealing with, so.
The guts of the building.
the guts, yeah. Okay, thank you. So anything else? All right, so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Schultz, and he'll let you lead us through what you have tonight.
We've got a crew with us tonight that's been working and walking through the buildings, going through the buildings with your staff, and we're gonna give you a lot of information about the high school facility, right? For those that have been involved in looking at this facility for quite some time and various referendums, there's gonna be a lot of repeat information. But I think you'll appreciate the level of depth that the folks went into. So from our team perspective that we have here, I'll be doing some just introductions on what it is we're trying to do to help you out. Talk a little bit about that, our construction challenges and so forth. World Architects is here, and they're gonna just kind of give an overview of the facility itself. The challenges with a secure entry. Schools around the state of Minnesota have all gone to state secure entries, controlled entries. The challenges with doing that here, and what could we start to look at doing if we are going to, what's been referred to by the building committee as a plan B, to address some of the safety needs. What might that be? Interiors, you do have a lot of needs interior-wise and so on. We'll talk about that. We do want to bring up the educational adequacies. When we're here to serve children and education And it's important that we at least bring that forward, knowing that that's probably down the road. If indeed you do go for referendum and it fails, it likely would be down the road for this building. JQP is, they're experts in ADA accessibility, and they've scrubbed your school from top to bottom. Took a day when the kids were gone, and I think you're gonna find that information very interesting and helpful. Garland Roofing, Troy's here from Garland Roofing. Troy's worked with the district many years. Cheryl, what do you have for roofing needs here? Talk about positive things you've done this year. Institute for Environmental Assessment was not able to be here. Got all of the reports. I'll do my best to try to present their information on their behalf. They'll be coming to look at the school here in a couple of weeks and add more information. We're running Olson Engineers is here. Cole Carlson, alumni, is here to talk about some of the HVAC needs here and what you might focus on in the potential plan B. Brett Kramer, local businessman, owner of RJ Mechanicals here. Give us a perspective. We'd appreciate getting a call from our team to give a local perspective from someone that actually works with your staff and does service and maintenance here at the school. And then your district facility staff. They're back cleanup here and just talk about maybe how all this kind of comes together. And we'll open up for questions and answers now. By the way, questions, our team decided just to stop us along the way. If you've got questions as a board, just feel free to bring them up. All right. ICS, Jeff Schultz with ICS with me is Kevin Warren. There he is running things down back. We do a lot of construction management and planning and design oversight for schools across Minnesota. Doing this myself for 28 years. I'm a mechanical engineer and a background in finance. We have offices throughout, centered around Minnesota. When we met with the building committee, as you remember, you did a prioritization exercise. You found your prioritization exercise matched that on the citizen task force that went through a repair plan a year ago. You then prioritized these needs, brought them to the board at your last meeting, and in prioritization order, the first thing you wanted us to be looking at, if we're doing a plan B, is the health and safety. Second is addressing some of these infrastructure needs within this facility. And then third is security and ADA. And hopefully we can just start working on some of these educational things as well. And then department-specific and community things, really focusing on safety and security and those things that are really have to be done, that have been put off into this facility for quite some time. Okay. As we get into looking at a plan B, I think it's important not just for the board to understand, but the community to understand. There's a lot of the folks on our team who do renovations in schools all over the place. We build new schools all over the place. We understand the differences between them. We're in the business. But you don't always know these types of things. So we want to make sure you understand challenges with doing a significant repair renovation plan of this building, right? Majority of the work's got to be done in the summer, right? When the kids are gone, so we can tear into walls, put in new ductwork, rerun piping. We've got to remove asbestos. We've got to get asbestos out of here, right? We got to do that when the kids are not here, when staff's not here, and be looking at safety as part of that, right? It's an important piece. This a significant project is probably going to be phased over 2 years, 2 summers. It's too much work to try to get it jammed into one summer, right? We need to be looking at adjusting the school calendar to have enough days in the summer. And this is done throughout the state. It's not nothing that can't be done, but you just need to know it does cost more to do things that way, right? But that's really what schools deal with. There's no place for you to move the kids so that we can have at this building and then move them back, right? That's a challenge. Safety, there is construction that's going to be worked around during school season, right? You're not going to get it all just done and buttoned up during this time frame. We really need to take care of the safety kids, safety fencing, separate parts of the building, which means you got to change egress, and make sure safety routes, those types of things. Asbestos and other hazardous materials is very stringent on how processes are associated with that, and when we can get that work done, when we can't, and the time, even construction activity. Construction workers can't be here when we're doing asbestos removal, right? Those types of things. We'll talk more about some of the other hazardous materials when IEA section comes up. And then contingency. You're gonna be tearing in the walls, you're gonna find things, right? You do understand what remodeling does, you know, you're gonna find, especially in the older school facilities. As you get behind walls and start tearing stuff, that's what I was wondering. So those are some things we felt pretty important to share with you, just so, as we're going into Plan B, we're going into the eyes wide open. The site, and you as a board are pretty familiar with some of the challenges with this, but you've got this busy road running right next to your school, and you've got parking associated on this side of the road, students crossing back and forth across it. And I know it's been a challenge, and something that the school district's been working on, trying to, what do you do different? How do you fix that, right? How do we close the road? We'll be meeting with the city to talk about potential road closures, even if it's even an option. Sounds like it has not been an option in the past. But that is really a critical thing. Now, we don't, if you ever saw a school built today, there is not a busy road where parking's on the other side of the road, right? Another item we have as a challenge is bus pickup and drop off. Now, you moved it to the back over here. It's not perfect. It also is to your ADA, your one ADA entrance you have. But it's certainly not ideal. Because you also have parking there. You have safety issues associated with your bus pickup and drop off. Parent pickup and drop off. Well, there really isn't any. It's right out front of the school. It adds to the congestion and the traffic challenges associated with your school. These are all site challenges that you have, right? Positive thing you have here is you have some green space right next to your school for Phi Ed, right? As well as your football field on the property, right? Well, option, and you're gonna see options from Ron there, we're starting to look at this. You could maybe move your parking here, right? But your football coach is going to say, well, wait a minute, you're taking away one, green space for Phi Ed, and two, you're taking away the practice field. Now we're going to practice off campus. You know, it's one of the things we're trying to stop is the kids traveling, right? And so on. You're creating a problem if we do that. We just need to know that. But safety is first, and it's one of your first priorities, right? So it creates a challenge. Plus, if we put parking here, you're going to be going across the parking to get to your green space. Creates another safety challenge, right? Unless you put your parking this way, right? And now you're taking away your football field, right? So we're really looking at your site as a holistic team to try to figure out how do we best address some of those types of things. In addition, you have a lot of parking and site needs, fix your parking lots and those types of things. So it makes sense to be looking at all that at the same time versus just fixing it as is versus taking the time to really look at it. If you're going to be here for a while, time to really look at doing it right for the sake of your children. So, geez, I have a zoomed in now that would have made it a little bit easier for me if I went to the next tab. But let's see. Well, there we go. We'll just keep going. Your crossing, I mean, you've tried to make it better. You had some ADA crossing things, but times I've been here, this is the challenges. I don't know if you guys as a board. You have challenges. The other challenge, you walk this way. If you're a visitor coming to school, where do I go? Where's the entrance? Where's the entrance to the school? There isn't a clear entrance to your school. Well, you've tried your best to make a secure entry with a doorbell and a bunch. You let somebody in, you have no idea where they're at or where they're going into the school, right? They could be going anywhere, but you give them access, right? That is just not, and I'll talk a little more about that in today's school design. That just is not happening elsewhere, right? They need to be supervised. There should be somebody there to physically see who's coming in to grant them access to your children. Okay? You also have split entries at both of these two entrances. It's a split entry. You don't see split entries. Split entries is a problem for, for ADA accessibility and so on, which, your buildings were built before all those types of codes and guidelines came into play. So, that's it. Cool. I'm going to turn it over to Lon, just to talk a little about interiors, educational design.
Hi, nice to see everybody. I'm a partner of Boulder Architects and Engineers. Our primary focus is public sector buildings. The predominant amount of work we do is education. That's all I focus on. I've been with the company for 25 years. And worked in the Trailview Edition, worked in the Wellness Center, and so I've got some familiarity with the district as well. Jeff started talking about sites a little bit, so I'm going to talk about things backwards. First, I'm going to show you some options for how you fix these things. But in reality, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this is fixing things functionally without dealing with the physical conditions associated with either the building or the site. So we'll have to work backwards a little bit from that standpoint. So one option here, creating parking adjacent to the building. This is a basic school layout function, as we don't want parking across the street so that all parent pickup, drop off is on the same side of the entry point. It would put grass across the street. The other thing it does is we have to talk about not only a secure entry, but also an ADA accessible entry. As Jeff mentioned, the only ADA accessible entry right now is in the back of the building by the receiving area. So it's a public school facility, and so if I'm a public member coming to the building and I've got a buzzer system here, I still don't have accessibility to get up to the front door, and if I get in, I've got to have some staff member come to the back door, let me in, do all these other items. What we'd be looking at doing would be, right at this point, right outside here, creating a secure vestibule. It also means moving an office to that point so that because the stair there is double wide at the bottom, it has some room for us to get up to that split level location. So it would involve a lift as well as moving the office to the front door there. So all visitors, once they come into the building, must pass through the office. We deal with ballistics glass, we deal with other items to make sure that we've created that secure facility. Right now, any visitor coming into the stair in the corner, as soon as they're buzzed in, unless they choose to go to the office, they're inside the building at that point. So we would need to deal with that in terms of that application. So this would provide queuing space for parents, maintains our receiving, gets people out to the field. It does put grass across the street, which means that for Phi Ed, I'd have to escort the students across the street, but that's a controlled scenario. And then for buses, you have 15 buses, 3 special education buses. We looked at a few different options. One is, could we get 15 buses queued up in front of the building if we cut the curbs back and did the whole length? No, we can get 14. We still have our special ed buses queuing up near the accessible door in the back. So another option we looked at would be bringing all the buses to the side, changing the layout of this parking lot. We can get some of the buses on each side, meaning that students leaving the building use a walk to get there. The buses do not back up. This is very similar to the bus corral we have at the elementary school, where the first one pulls off, the second one follows in that order. We can get the buses out here and maintain additional on-street parking as well as our parent pickup drop-off. Or a third option would be having bus pickup in front as well as bus pickup on the side, so we don't send any students around to the backside. Create an accessible entrance point for our special education students. So we've got queuing space here. We've got additional staff parking to this side that replaces some of the parking in this area and all maintains that. So some options for what you would do dealing with a small site in terms of how you bring parking and drop off back on the other side of the road to be more in line with what we'd see at other school campuses, no matter what the age group level is.
And are there enough spots for student parking on there?
Yes, this replaces the quantity of parking in this area, in this spot across the street.
There
So-
would be enough for parent drop-off, for student drop-off, and student parking.
Yep, so this expands some of the parking here, picks up the same quantity here, creates dedicated queuing loop to get parents off the street and into that point, and a secure entry point coming into the building, in theory.
Seems crowded.
It's crowded, absolutely.
I mean, so then that becomes a safety issue,
Yeah.
so.
Inside the building, this is where you start to get into subjectives. You can look at finishes and say, our carpet's worn out, we've got areas that are frayed, we've got asbestos tile, we've got chipping paint, you can see some of the flooring chipping away here, and you can start to be selective and say, what do we need to do in terms of paint? What do we need to do in terms of replacing flooring? Our cabinetry where we've got countertops chipping away. It's hard to argue that if those are functional or not, or if they're purely aesthetic. When you start to get into some of the cabinets, again, we don't have locked storage in our science areas, for example. We don't have all the gas and power in some of these areas. So it starts to move beyond the finishes in some of these spaces. And from the exterior of the building, this is really, in terms of Minnesota, this is what's most critical, is we're dealing with moisture penetration. And you're gonna hear about roofing, but from the other aspects of the envelope, our windows, uninsulated. I know we've got, from talking to staff, we've got some insect issues with some of the windows, but these are all broken thermal seal, rusting lintel windows, so you could start with just looking at the windows and doors in the building. Additionally, we've got tuck pointing issues. We've got cracked masonry where we've got moisture coming in and out. It's the freeze thaw that's a real big problem. Some of the older areas of the building, they're the original walls, they're not insulated, and so from an energy standpoint, we're not dealing with that. Roofing, as I mentioned, you're going to hear about. It's probably one of the shining spots in terms of your maintenance plan. But then we get into the functional pieces. And in order to really get at some of these, you have to be dealing with the physical issues to start with. But this is a comparison to the Minnesota Department of Education guidelines for school construction and what sizes they would allocate for spaces if you were building new. And so what we've tried to do is show where we've got spaces that are pink is greater than 10% deficiency. Yellow, they're smaller than guidelines, but still within 10%, and green is where you have a surplus. And so to point out the highlights, you can see all the pink on there. Of the 25 classrooms you have in the building, 19 of them are below the guidelines, 76%, with 10 of them being at least 10% or more below the guidelines for size. So as you've increased class sizes, you're putting more students in spaces that aren't sized appropriately for the number of students that the state would look at. Science labs are acceptable size, even though they're missing power or gas or some of the other things, except for 7th grade science, which is in an original classroom. So, and that's nowhere near the other science labs. So that's 2/3 the size of what the state guidelines would be. The FACS lab's a little small, which in itself isn't a problem, but the number of students that you have, it's a very popular program. And so you're running a ton of students in a space that's just a little bit too small, which makes the problem even more complicated. Your business lab, your art lab, those are in the old 30s building. Those are 50% of the state guideline size. The high school IT labs, within the guidelines, but again, popular program, especially our automotive. The junior high one's really small compared to the guidelines, these in here. The media center's a little bit low, but that needs some reconfiguration anyways. So as we took a look at the building, this is just simply answering the question, well, what would you do with the building? Could you fix it? And I'm not suggesting this is what you would do because this doesn't have any additional community planning efforts or anything else in it. But just going through, as I mentioned, secure vestibule in the front, moving the high school office to this location so that the office is at the front door, creates that accessible point coming in, moves 7th grade science out of the upper levels, down next to the other science areas, starts to address the ag lab, the shop areas by expansion, addresses some of the music issues. As you get to the upper level, it's repurposing classrooms in the 30s building, creating a second FACS lab, doing a lot of these different components. But in order to get to that, you have a lot of physical issues to deal with as well. One of the rules of thumb that we always look at with buildings is what's the cost of new versus the cost of renovation. And it used to be an automatic decline from the state if you were going to spend more than 60% of what it would cost to build new on renovation for a building. They've since lifted that because we've had some districts like Hibbing saying, we have a historic high school, this has been in our community forever, we have a lot of pride to it, and you're going to tell us we can't do that? They still want to know that you thought through that. I'm not sure that you would consider the 70s building of historic significance to say there's a reason that we wouldn't do that. And so I think it would come into question what you were going to do as part of this building if you had renovated. Could you fix it? You could make some improvements to it. It's not going to be quite the same though in terms of your adjacencies, spaces that you want. In terms of what would you get at first? I think relocating the 7th grade science and dealing with some of the updates at the other science labs just purely from a safety standpoint in terms of what you're doing. Showers, eye washes, appropriate power, appropriate gas in those areas. And the ag lab, another one of your programs, that really needs to be about 2 to 3 times the size. There's no sinks in the space, there's no coolers in the space. You're running a program in an old classroom space that's not appropriate for the function of it. The fax lab, as I mentioned, some additional storage. After that, you might get to classroom configuration. You might start to add some of those, but there's other areas that are just difficult to address. It's still a multiple level building, split level building where nothing's at grade. It's got all sorts of different levels to it. The 30s portion of the building is embedded in the rest of the building. It's not like you could simply tear down the old part of the building and say, well, we're good. You'd have to surgically cut that out and fill it back in with something else. And then other secure entry, office, your maintenance repairs, all of these then, if you start making some of these renovations, this is when your building code issues start to come into play. So yes, you are grandfathered in on a number of items, but just starting off the bat, you don't have a fire sprinkler system in the building, which means any significant renovation we do, any additions we do, we're gonna now have to look at allowable areas by code and say, can we do that or not? Do we have to put firewalls in to start separating the building down into pieces? Or do we put a sprinkler system in throughout the building to get up to the right size? Do we have the right widths of egress everywhere in the building as we're going through? ADA compliance, you're gonna hear a lot about. You're gonna hear a lot about mechanical code and energy code. But once you start to do these renovations, a lot of this kicks into play. And the state is now very strongly enforcing the ADA compliance of, if you're gonna do a renovation, they will force you to spend up to 25% of your budget on that. So that just adds an automatic add-on to fix your ADA issues that so many districts went over the years and saying, we'll get to that, we'll get to that. The state's now saying, no, you'll get to it now if you're gonna
Yes,
do
they
it.
should.
So these are issues that we deal with architecturally going through the space as you come through. And again, we'd like to get to the educational issues, but I think you have to deal with the physical issues first.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Absolutely.
You've been doing this a long time. Have you run into a similar situation like this throughout the state where they've done a renovation on a building that probably doesn't have the historical significance, and had the state pass it and get
We have,
matching?
right now, I grew up in Princeton, I'm working with them again, and their original high school building, it's a little different than yours in that as they built around it, it's a 1964 building, so it's 30 years newer than your oldest part. They put new spaces on that all work. Well, now we can't cut that core out of the building at all because it's the original square in there. And so we're gonna have to go in and fix that because they have literally stairwells that are about 4 feet wide for students to go up and down. Hallways are too small, they got a number of ADA issues in the bathrooms, and so that's one that we're gonna be looking at, how do we fix that building? We've certainly had the issue before of looking at buildings that have multiple vintages to it. South St. Paul is another one of those where they don't have land available, they don't have space available, and they've had so many additions to their buildings over the years that they've got similar problems. But that is one that kind of represents the state's idea of, this is a historic building that most kids, their parents and their grandparents went to school there, and it still has that significance. We have taken down portions of the building over the year, but it's piecing it back together because they don't have any other options. And I think you find that more in metro areas where the space is dense and you don't have the options versus in areas where you do have land available.
And I know you can make this happen, but from a state standpoint, would they approve us spending this kind of money into this, in this particular space? I mean, it's a loaded question, but in your expertise and experience.
If you sent this in, the state's going to ask, what was your process for reviewing that? What did the community say in terms of that investment? Can you give us some rationale for why they wanted to reinvest in the building versus building new? It wouldn't be an automatic rejection, but they'd want to see all the steps you took to question why you were doing that. Same thing with site size. Site size used to be an automatic trigger to say, if you don't have an appropriate size site, we're not gonna let you reinvest in that area because we wanna see you making progress. Same issue came back, Duluth or some other areas going, this building's been here forever, we wanna make an investment in it. Okay, well, where else do you have green space? How are you handling that? How are you getting kids there safely? So it's not automatic rejections, but they are serious questions that the state will ask as part of that review and comment process.
Do you think they'd look at us more closely because we do have other space?
I think the fact that you've acquired land and made investments and you've taken steps forward, they would strongly question, why are you not considering that long-range plan? How are you taking steps to get to that point?
Thank you.
Other questions on architectural issues? Again, these are, I think, are you gotta deal with the physical conditions issues before you can get to some of those building educational issues. You'd like to just say, well, let's make the education work, but if the building has its issues around that, it's gonna be tough to go. So this is a good segue into accessibility, because that's gonna be an automatic in terms of doing renovations. So Julie, I'll turn it over to you.
What's the payback on building new? Dollar-wise, after the referendum is totally paid off, that we'd have to wait 20 years for a payback on that project. Now you do a remodeling, you put windows in, you're immediately getting a payback on energy savings. You do other things and you're getting a payback over time.
Energy projects, you'd probably look at return on investment in terms of payback. I'm not sure that you can look at a subjective issue as education as what's the payback around
Information we should know.
it. Again, that would be more of an energy savings issue related to systems and infrastructure, and you'll probably hear about that with mechanical systems and some of the other components.
Then what Jeff spoke about the site, you should check with Columbia Heights. They got the same setup in Columbia Heights. They got a grade school next to the high school and a parking lot across the street. And 49th Avenue is as busy or busier than this street out here, and they don't seem to have a problem.
They sure do.
I'm not sure.
Class of
about that.
96, Columbia Heights, they sure do have those problems. Absolutely, without a doubt. And in fact, I was just in that building last week.
How many kids got hit crossing?
I don't have the answer to that question, but they have
got
issues.
crossing guards.
They have issues.
It's a safe place to be.
Other questions?
Wait, and it's left. And I did hear from you that if I'm back here, you can see better.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. What if I go out here? I'm Julie from Julie Corby Peterson Incorporated. Everybody's telling what their references are. I've been measuring toilets, urinals, and parking stalls for 46 years. The education group calls me the latrine queen and the parking princess. All I've been doing full time. Accessibility was a total fluke. Didn't know anybody with a disability, but I had to write a paper in college and I got into it. My daughter works with me. She was born into it and she's been with me full time for 14 years at least. There is a designation in Minnesota as a certified accessibility specialist, which means we have to take continuing ed. We are very involved, not just in schools, although that's probably 50%, and it's our favorite client base. So I have recently calculated that I have been in 88% of the square footage of schools in Minnesota. And that goes from Baudette, which has one building for pre-K through continuing ed, to Minneapolis schools, Duluth, Rochester, so I've seen a lot. And we also do playgrounds, just because it's fun. We were at the building on a non-student day for a whole variety of reasons. Getting in the men's toilet room is a whole lot easier when the kids aren't there. And the Americans, what happened? I can't go backwards. The previous slide, there we go. Are we still going forward?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so it's referred to as the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. That is a federal law, and that is what is driving a lot of accessibility. If you chose to do nothing today, tomorrow, you have risk management, you have liability for the State Department of Education, for any individual. If grandma came to see her grandson playing a basketball game and could not get in the building or could not use the toilet room because it didn't fully comply, you were at risk of losing your federal funding. And that has happened, that has been threatened. It's been around since, well, for a long period of time. The ADA passed in 1990, saying that you need to take a look and make certain that your programs, services that you offer are accessible. So you're just kind of, so far so good, as far as I know. Cool. So it's a federal law. It passed in 1990. It applies not only to the building, but also policies and procedures. So there's more to it than just wheelchair access. Because actually wheelchair access covers about 12% of the people with disabilities that are covered under this law. Hearing impaired, vision impaired, cognitive disabilities, temporary disabilities, they're all covered. There's things that need to be done in the building, hearing impaired. It applies to existing buildings where other codes have this thing referred to as grandfathering. There is no such thing as grandfathering with the ADA. And I recently attended a training and the guy used some great language saying, you can't grandfather the ADA because the ADA was adopted. Meaning that it's a federal law, it just applies. So that's not even to be used. And it also applies to your programs and services that you offer. This building in the 30s, when it was first built, functioned very differently than it does today. The activities, the people coming here, the hours it's open, the technology that's available, the visitors, all of those things are of significant importance for your community. I know the Vasilopet's coming up, and when I was here 2 years ago, it was very active. There could easily be a family member or a volunteer with a disability that would have difficulty, and even if they saw the sign out in front saying where the parking is, they might not know where Northwest is. So those types of issues. Here's where I was. On the 20th we were here, my daughter and I walked the building. I've got drawings. I threatened I was going to do this. The red means it's an issue. That doesn't comply. That's one floor. So there were a number of issues. But we were hired to nitpick. So if it's a knob rather than a lever, if the sign isn't correct, if the space next to the door isn't exactly what it should be, we wrote it down. But we took it the next step, and I'll share with you what our big findings were. So there's a basis for review. One is the federal law, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, but there's also the state building code, which was referenced by Vaughn. And the state building code, in this case, it's kind of like a domino. So when he was talking about creating a secure entry, when you touch things, whatever you touch is required to be accessible. And the reference to, it's not just the state of Minnesota and MDE, it's within the language of the building code in Minnesota and within the language of the law of the ADA. When you do an alteration or an addition, that must 100% comply. But there's this thing that says path of travel. In other words, how do I get there? If you made that rear entry, southwest corner, or northwest, or whatever it is, 100% accessible, how do you get to other places? You know, where is the locker room? How do you get from the locker room to the gym? You know, and some of these places, yeah, you can do it, but given the class period and the time breaks in between, they're gonna be late for class, every class. So there can be those types of problems. So we prepared a report and we shared it with the others, and we've summarized in a couple of different ways what our findings are. Yeah. There we go. We used a 4-priority system. Priority 1 is, when I mentioned you're basically at risk right now, if you chose to do nothing, you still have these issues that are a problem that you could lose federal funding on, you could be sued on. I don't know, it seems like you're familiar with the metro area, but there's lawyers running around suing cities, suing school districts, suing the bar down the street over the height of a parking sign, and they're winning. And then you have to pay your lawyer and them, and it's a lose-lose situation. So there's a lot of risk out there with accessibility right now. Plus, I would venture to bet your population of students with disabilities has increased significantly over the years from the 1930s building. And the use that the buildings are getting now from the community and outside user groups, you don't know who's coming in the door 10 minutes from now. Back when we were concerned about students, we knew in advance when that kindergartner was coming in, and we could plan in advance. Now you've got this potential person just showing up for the Vasilopet to volunteer. They have the right to enter, park, use a toilet room, get to the area that they need to get to. And if they can't, they've got a legitimate, beef to take up with you. So priority one is there's a barrier to a program or service. It's not every entrance needs to be accessible. It's not every toilet room. It's a minimum of one. So, go from that. Priority 4, we call when it falls off, fix it. If there's a doorknob on the janitor's closet, we don't really think in an existing building it's a good, idea to change that knob to a lever until it falls off. But if there's a knob on the front door, we better change that to a lever. We better be easily operable. There better be one toilet room that's centrally located that fully complies, and you can put signs at the other one directing people. But again, then it gets to the logistics of how is the building locked off and functioning? Do you want to have people wandering the entire building to find that one accessible toilet room, or where is the elevator? So you could meet the minimum requirements, but is it really going to function well are decisions that you're going to have to really look at. But that's kind of how they broke out as far as the numbers. Priority 1, you don't have a fully compliant toilet room. And prior to the ADA passage in 1990, there was a law dating back to 1973 that applied to your schools that said you need to have I call them double wides, a 5-foot wide stall so that you can parallel park, whether it's your wheelchair or your walker, next to the toilet and slide across. Because going in one of the narrow ones with your wheelchair, the door is open and you're standing up and you're supposed to turn around to use the toilet. I mean, the reason you might be in the chair is because standing up and turning around are not safe things to be doing. So at least one needs to be accessible. Creating an accessible locker room. You got visiting teams coming in. I don't know if anybody's followed hockey with Jack Jablonski, who was the hockey player in high school that became a quadriplegic. He just graduated from college and he got a job doing announcing. That school and that community rallied around and went beyond the requirements, and he is a super high functioning, very productive human being because the environment's accessible. It's the environment that was keeping him from being successful had he not had the support from the community. They put power door openers on and they made accessible toilet rooms at the hockey rink. We talked about how popular your fax is. There's not an accessible cooking lab. I don't know about you, but I lived in Grand Marais for 10 years, and when it was holiday cookie bake time, we lived across the street from school, and I just called up and said, I want to use the fax lab. My kitchen ain't big enough. So we would have, the kids doing different things. The community has access. They do cookie bakes. There's all sorts of things that happen. So you need to have, and it's not, brain surgery. It's having a low section of counter where you can roll up underneath. So it's not huge, but you don't have it right now. So if that second lab were to be built that you're talking about, Vaughn, that's where you would include the accessible. It's only one station. Science, same thing. The science labs aren't accessible. You can't reach the gas, the water, the jet, the sink. You can't roll under the counter. The counters are too high. There wasn't an eye wash. Some of the tables didn't provide knee clearance to go underneath. So again, it's in need of help from an accessibility standpoint. The biggie is, where do you get in? The best you've got is that one back here that I parked back there just to remind myself how many dumpsters I go by and the fuel tank, and it's the receiving and loading area. And it still needs work because there's slip and trip hazards in addition to accessibility issues. Then you get to the door and the buzzer is too high. I wouldn't be able to get in. And the door is a bit heavy to open. And once I'm in, where do I go? So, making that. Again, here I'm talking about signage. Probably one of the first things you should do after you make like one toilet room and one entry, buy a lot of signs and tell people where stuff is. Because they're not going to know. If they've been here in the past, how would they know where the new accessible toilet room is and the accessible entrance, and where is the elevator? Where are some of these features? posting signs to tell you to get there, and then possibly relocating some of the activities. Some of the spaces, you couldn't really get to everything in the space. So if you were going to take some of the ag classes and things like that, it's more like a slide rather than a ramp to get to, and some of the things are not meeting full requirements. And that's an educational issue. Somebody should have the same right to take an ag class or whatever. Took a lot of photos. My daughter always jokes back in the day when, you know, like now if somebody steals their phone and they look at the pictures, they're gonna give it back. Because it's mostly toilets and parking spaces. Like, who's this woman taking pictures of urinals? But we took pictures of the features, and clearly attempts have been made. A lot of work has been done, but it doesn't comply now, and it didn't comply at the time it was done because there wasn't clear understanding. I mean, everybody tries to, oh, let's put the grab bar here. Okay, well, that's pretty good. And then you got a new vendor for toilet paper. They give you a new, you know, dispenser. Well, who wants to stick their head down between the toilet and the wall and put it where it's supposed to be, below the grab bar? So they put it above. You can't use the grab bar if the toilet paper dispenser is above, because you need to have your arm there and you can't like reach around like this. So I do a lot of animations. I'll tell you how to transfer, how to dance with the door. But, you know, it's not all wheelchair access. It's a lot of other folks that benefit too. Yep, there's our urinal pictures. This is in the locker room. It's everything from a shower with a handheld wand, so if somebody's seated, or if they need to sit down because they've got, you know, there's a variety of disabilities. I really don't know that much about disabilities. I know about what people can do. And they need to sit when they're showering. So there's a lot that needs to be done for a whole lot of reasons in the locker rooms, besides the fact they can't get much further from the gym. If there's a kid with a disability and you upgraded those toilet rooms, by the time they got to class, it would be almost over. So. Here's the kitchen showing some of the lab issues. Again, just not being able to roll under. Science, same thing. And it's only one lab, but you would want one in each discipline. You want one in biology, one in physics, one in chemistry, because it just doesn't work real well otherwise. And here's the entry. Here's the main entrance, and they were pointing out, Vaughn showed how you park. You've got accessible parking over there. You go across the street. Yep, you can do that. But the sidewalks have cross slope in addition to running slope. Cross slope is actually more of an issue. If you're with your walker or cane trying to go and you're doing this, it's very unsafe and you tip over. So flattening it out and bringing it up to the main entrance. But this is what a lot of people with disabilities really don't like. Going by the dumpster to get in, if that were the only entrance. There's the Northwest door. That's where the sign is there. Most people I know have no clue where Northwest is. So priority 1 findings. Just to meet the minimum compliance, if you're not doing anything, you don't do Plan A, you don't build new, you don't do B, you still need to provide these priority 1 items here. And it's a science lab, it's a toilet room. When you start doing that, you then look at the next things, and we talked about, I use the word dominoes, because when work is done, then everything needs to be brought up in that area. In addition to you spend up to 20%. I don't know if Department of Ed has taken it up a little bit further, and they could have, but in the ADA and in the building code, it says if you're going to do a $100,000 project, you are obligated, and the Department of Education is saying, we want to know what your path of travel is. If you've got all those trades out there and you're doing that work, how do people get there? So it may mean parking, entrance, toilet rooms serving the altered area. So you've kind of opened this can of worms up. So back in the day when I used to just sort of say, well, just put a handle on here and adjust the door tension and fix the threshold and do a few things. It's now a whole lot more, and they're enforcing it. And then we were asked, what are the advantages of new construction? So if you did the minimum, if you did those priority ones in this building, you would meet the minimum code and law requirements. One entrance, one toilet room, one elevator, you'd have to fix some doorknobs to door levers and a few things like that. But just the functionality of the building, if you only had that one entrance, where do you go? If you only have one toilet room, how long does it take you to get there? How does the public use the space? So your question about is kind of like throwing good money at a bad project. That's not for me to decide. That's for you folks to evaluate. And I just wanted to put my little piece about accessibility and let you know that if you choose to do absolutely nothing, you still have some obligations and risks regarding accessibility. Any questions for me?
And as Julie said, they will now go down the drawing sets when we turn them in for plan review and say, show me where you're making ADA upgrades, and they're gonna check those 5 areas. And if you've done every one of those 5 areas in the building, they might say, okay, you're probably good for a while then. But otherwise, it's gonna start with what's your path of travel, how do I get into the building, how do I get into the classrooms, what's the handle on the door, where are the bathrooms, and they're just gonna go down the list, and it will be 20% of the budget.
And one of the things is, 1973 is a long time ago. And in 1973, there have been codes and laws mandating that schools and post offices and city halls be accessible. And again, it was to the minimum, it was one way in and it was a minimum. But it's been so long now that they're saying, you've probably resurfaced your parking lot how many times? You've changed out your sinks, you've changed out your stall partition, you've re-keyed the door hardware and you put new locks on. All of those things can be upgraded for accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I did have a really good time here though. I go to a lot of schools. Everybody was super nice and it was super clean. And when we went into classrooms, everybody wanted to know why we were there. We didn't throw anything at us.
Thank you, folks. Nice to meet you. Thanks for the time. My name is Troy Thompson with the Garland Company. I'm going to speak a little bit about your roofing today, and hopefully be a little good news, if you will. So just a little brief background on the Garland Company. A pretty old company, 125 years old, actually celebrating this year. Multiple offices throughout the United States. Work with a fair number of school districts here throughout Minnesota. I've been lucky enough to work with the school district here since 2007 over the last few years with Chip and his staff, so that's been really nice. Personally, I've been in Minnesota with Garland here for about 20 years. A little bit about us. A couple items I want to touch on tonight. Kind of talk about where you've already done roof replacements. A lot of good news there. Talk about the remaining roofs that you have left here at this facility at the high school. Talk a little about the 1936, the original building there, some of the wall issues that go along with the roofing portion of that work, and then I'll hit some quick estimates on budgets and whatnot. So, overview map of the district. The great news, congratulations on the past referendum and the work you did up at the elementary school. It turned out very good. The great news about that is it's really not on your radar right now for roofing. So that's a really nice thing. It's one less item, if you will, on your plate. So really the attention is focused here more on the high school. The areas in green are the areas that have been replaced over basically starting in 2007. I'm going to say almost once every other year, every third year roughly. Along with the roof replacements, there's been a pretty good aggressive effort by the district to keep doing maintenance on the existing roofs to try to keep them as watertight as possible. It is getting a little harder though. The roofs are far beyond their life expectancy, so that comes with a certain amount of issues. And I'll show you a few condition pictures of what I saw up there. So the remaining roofs here, in particular at the high school, just kind of a recap. Section N is over your 4th story classroom. Section F is the auditorium roof. And then D, I have to take notes because I'm always on roofs, but I don't really know what's underneath half the time, to be honest.
Music.
Yeah. I'm like, I had it written down. I'm like, I'll never remember what's in this. So music, thanks, Vaughn. Back. There you go. sorry. So roof replacement, the areas in red are the roofs that still need to be replaced. Everything else that you see in white has been done. So a lot of good news, probably over half of the building has been completed. The area in red here on the north side and the east side of your 1936 edition, that's where I'll show a couple condition photos of the walls and maybe a couple options of how you would want to address that. Overview pictures, there's your 4th story classroom addition, ballasted EPDM roof. This is over the music area, and then there's over your auditorium area. Basically, just broad pictures of the remaining roofs that still need to be taken care of. So here's some condition photos that we see, very typical of the aging roofs and that are in this life cycle. Some areas of ponding water. When you do a roof replacement by code, we have to bring them up to new R value requirements. We're going to add additional slopes so that they do drain better as well. Okay, a lot of cuts, tears, pulling of the membrane, very common. Some of these roofs that are remaining, you're getting to the point where even the past patchwork has failed. So Chip and his staff, and through the help of other outside contractors, they've done a great job maintaining these roofs, but they're just at the point where like kind of got to wrap them up. The upper right is just a condition picture that we've shown last year on the last roof replacement. We actually had the contractors go around and do multiple repairs while they were on site just to try to maintain a watertight condition. So that's a broad picture of the 1936 building, and you can see up in the upper right corner, it really sticks out because it's been caulked to try to maintain a watertight condition. They've had a lot of leaks along this wall. The thing that you're seeing, that there's obviously leaks associated with the roof in that area too, but it is the walls. So I always get nervous when we try to replace roofs next to walls that show potential problems, because the last thing I would ever want to see you do is do a roof replacement. The wall leak continues to leak in the building, or worst case scenario, the leaks back into your new roof system that you just paid to replace. So when we're looking at it, we want to take more of a holistic approach and say, okay, what is the envelope environment here? Is it the roof, is it the walls, or we want to hit it all and make sure there's no future problems? So pretty typical tuck pointing issues, a lot of stair stepping, bad mortar, it's deteriorated. It's an old building, so it's just to be expected. Nothing out of the ordinary. Option A really is to re-tuck point. Very traditional. It's extremely labor intensive. They have to grind out every vertical, every horizontal joint, or do spot replacement. I think on that, on the 1936, you're probably looking at a full replacement if the plan was to stay in this building long term. Then they're going to re-tuck it with new mortar. The other approach, this is actually the 1936 roof up here when that was done. Looking back here, that was done in 2009. So one thing that we did there is those old parapet walls, they were pretty deteriorated. There were a lot of masonry issues, so we ended up coming in, insulating and plywooding those walls, and then putting new panels on the walls to make it a maintenance-free environment. Again, I don't want to do the roof down there and then also the wall above it leaks. So that's on a short wall, if you will. Tall walls, other options, the rain screen option. And essentially, to summarize what you do is you come in and put a breathable membrane that allows any moisture that is in the wall or could get in the wall to breathe out, to escape out, and then you clad it. All different types of cladding, different profiles, different colors, a lot you can do there. Based on where it's at on the building, you may get fancy with it based on where, if it's in the back, like the 36 and north and east, you're looking for function, because it's not very visible. So just a couple of examples there. It's been done on the building. This is actually the north, the short, I'm going to call it a short wall on the north side of the auditorium. When this roof was replaced, that wall, masonry wall, is honestly was very much in the same condition. So we ended up putting wall panels on that. Now we know the whole environment is in good condition. So big picture, budgets, what you have left here at the high school, of the three main roofing areas, you're in that $750,000 to $1 million of roofing. Another 100, upwards of 150. So you're looking at $1 million, $1.2 million to take care of the last roofs that you have. It's been an aggressive approach by Chip and the administration to try to when they could with the advent of LTF, keep doing a chunk here, a chunk there. They worked through it, but there's a decent chunk left.
So how old is the oldest one in the red that's been done?
They're around 30 years old. And in the styles of
the ones that have been.
Oh, the white that have been
done.
I'm sorry. Yeah, they're around 2007. That's when those areas started to be replaced.
Okay. And they were 30-year roofs then?
Mhm.
Okay.
And the remaining roofs that you have now, they're rough, I think it's 29 to 31 years old roughly, with a normal life expectancy probably around that 18 to 20 years. So they're a good, I'm gonna say 5 to 10 plus years beyond their life expectancy that we would normally see.
Which means we're not too far off on the roofs that have been replaced, hitting that
Start that
15 to
cycle over
18.
again.
Yeah, and
That's my point, I guess.
yeah, there is a, I always try to say be preventative. You wanna do roofs that can last a long time, which you have done in the district, that's great. You don't wanna have to come back every 10 or 15 years and do it again, because there's not all of a sudden gonna be more money available, so. But yeah, it is an ongoing cycle, for sure, yeah.
And it should be.
Yeah, just routine, every other year or whatever the case is for the size of the district. Any other questions at all on that?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to present on behalf of IEA. Before that, I'm just gonna touch on a couple of things that, kind of heard from the group. One is, somebody, she left, what are the budgets for all this? Well, that's one of the things that the building committee will be wrestling with, and it is a meeting down the road, February 18th, to start wrestling with what this might be. But overall, if you remember, in the repair and renovate group and task force, they had a $42 million number to do most of the items, not all the educational things. And you can't fix your hallways and all, and the locker rooms are way over here and things are over there. But a $42 million number was, was part of that process. The building task force had a $21 million priority one repair and renovate plan last spring, right? $21 million for the top priorities. I know your building committee is like, yeah, we'd like to see something smaller than that if we're reinvesting in here for Plan B. So I want to share that. Bond's code, that issue of 20 to 25% is added to whatever this Plan B could be. They can force you to add that, right? We need to be really taking that into account in our Plan B. Site, one of the things that I heard from my time here at the district, if you take away that practice field, as Bond laid out, okay, where's the football team going to practice? Do you need to look at a turf field or something so that you can use that for education, ed, practice field, and game field? Because otherwise you can't use it, right? There's another $1.2 million. And so there's a lot of dominoes that keep coming into play as you talk about this. Okay? The other, the 1935 building is in the middle. So for those that don't understand, we built around it, and it's where the boiler is set. So it's the heart of the building. Really makes this one tough to pull that out or to knock the old down and build around it. So, all right. Now that being said, let's talk about IEA as a company that the district hires to do ongoing health and safety analysis within the district. They've done a number of studies, and all these they're public information. We will make sure that all of them that we've got, we have, and they can be put up on the website, public viewing. There was an IEQ building walkthrough just recently in January, where they came and tested the buildings. We'll talk about that. They've done lead in the water testing, which has been a bigger issue. Flint, Michigan, those types of things. You're scheduled for another one this year. We'll talk about that. Done radon testing in March and April of last year. The wood, metal, and auto shop assessment was done just this in January of 2019. And then they do periodic reports and surveillance on asbestos. Okay? I did not find any lead-based paint in investigations of this building. Another item that's important, if we're gonna start remodeling and tearing the walls, we need to know before the contractors can come in whether or not we have lead in the walls. One of the things, and I appreciate Kevin helping out with this, is kind of laid out mapping-wise, what did they find on their walkthrough on January 20th? Well, they color-coded things, so in your weight area that you've had in other areas, there's some moisture issues, right? Next slide, gets into more of the moisture issues in purple, right? And a number of areas with noticeable odor. And these are the professionals. These are certified folks that this is what they do for a living, right? They're in the report. It does have their stamp of credentials when they do things like this. Fungal growth, some area in the robotics, they found some fungal growth. The other is the CO2, carbon dioxide areas as they, and it's a tough measurement because it's a split second in time in this room. I can tell you right now, because there's no ventilation in this room, we verified that last week when we were here. We breathe out carbon dioxide. If you measured it, you'd find high CO2 levels because we're not bringing enough fresh air to dilute the space and bring in more oxidative space. CO2 does also, that makes you tired. But it is part of one standard of measurement for indoor air quality at that instant, okay? You look at the next floor, we have some more indoor air quality issues and moisture issues and so on. And you get to the fourth floor, wow, right? Holy cow. There's a whole lot of high levels of CO2, not able to get the fresh air. We went and walked these sites together with your maintenance staff. They're running. They're doing everything they can with we need more juice, Scotty. We don't have it, right? These are not sized appropriately for today's HVAC design, and you'll hear more about that from Cole. A third of your spaces that they analyzed in this building were a third were greater than that, 1,200 parts per million. A third of the spaces were noted with moisture issues, right? Again, ventilation also dries things up. Dehumidification really pulls moisture out of a building, right? As part of school design today. Lead and water testing, when that was done almost 5 years ago, you took some corrective action. You took out some of your drinking fountains to make sure kids didn't drink out of them. You posted signs in your concessionary, do not drink the water. Your staff works with your kitchen to flush out some of the faucets to try to make sure the lead levels would be down. The lead comes from solder that was used at the time of construction that leaches over time as it breaks down into your piping systems. You had 5 areas that tested above 20 parts per million back to that time. And again, your staff's doing everything they can to correct that. We should change it all out. We're really trying to get rid of the potential lead and water issue that you have. It means changing out your domestic water systems, a lot of which are from 1935, 1951, and so on. So it probably does make sense to start looking at that. Radon it's a newer thing that's being measured and analyzed in public sector buildings. You had tests done in both the elementary and the high school, and there were 2 areas in the high school that needed further investigation because they were high levels of radon. How do you remove radon? Ventilation. Best way to get rid of pollution is dilution. More air to move it out of the space. So it was retested again another month later. The levels were down, right? So that was good, right? But just something so that you're aware of in this building. The wood, metal, and auto shop areas, those that are in the educators in the room, we've heard from the principals, boy, when they get going on projects, which we want them to do, boy, the dust, the debris, the air quality in the spaces, and it goes to other areas. If you walked in the building today and you smelled something, it's a new mats, new wrestling mats. You could smell it all the way into the cafeteria, right? It's off-gassing, right? It takes time. Ventilation to off-gas that is part of it. All right, next. And, yeah. Well, other things, asbestos. Asbestos is common in buildings 1980 and earlier, right? A lot of materials, it was one of the best insulators known, right? You have a lot of asbestos. We have tested 360 locations, some of which test positive, some test negative. But that's areas they've got to. There's a lot of things and pipes that are in the walls. You've heard your maintenance staff talk about that. We got piping in walls. There's mastic that holds things up, like old chalkboards, the mastic. You don't know until you take it off the wall to test it, right? So a lot of areas yet to be tested, and you have a lot of asbestos tiles. 9x9 tiles are typically asbestos. There's many unknowns. The district does inspections every 3 years, but that's an important part of any renovation project. Okay, next. They have noticed, by the way, that your staff, if they come upon friable asbestos and those things, they take care of it. They work with the professionals to make sure it is safe for your children. So, I think that's an important thing for your public to understand as well. Okay, then I'll turn it over to Cole.
Well, I don't know how well the clickers will be.
I was gonna ask you before I got started.
I'll try and keep up with you.
Okay. All right, I'm Cole Carlson. I'm with Obermiller Nelson Engineering. We're a engineering consulting firm. We have offices throughout the state of Minnesota and North Dakota. I'm a 2006 alum from Mora. I recognize a few faces here today. So it's fun to be back here. I do get back on a regular basis, seeing my parents and brother who still live outside of town in the school district. I got a degree in physics from Gustavus and a Master of Science degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Colorado Boulder, and I'm a licensed professional mechanical engineer in the state. A little bit about Obermiller Nelson Engineering, or O&E as we call ourselves. We've been in business for 26 years. We have a large team of seasoned design and engineering professionals. As I said, we have multiple locations. Yeah, just a little bit more about our company, our values, and some of our experience. Last week I came down here and conducted a walkthrough of the school and documented what I saw, noted inadequacies, and tried to identify the highest priority pieces of equipment and spaces that would most highly need to be addressed if we were to invest in the school for the immediate future. So I'm going to take some time to just kind of walk you through what I saw, show you just some specific areas and photos that I documented to let you know what's down in the guts of the school. A lot of people don't get the chance to see those conditions, and they don't know what they're looking for. They don't have the experience or the expertise to identify areas of concern or deficiency. To start off, the facility maintenance staff have done a great job of keeping things going. They've managed to keep equipment running much longer past its average useful life. A lot of the HVAC equipment in the facility is original to the different additions and years of construction. It's all over the place, but the average age is 41 years old. So that's pretty significant. The boilers, which as Jeff mentioned are kind of the heart of the school, those were replaced roughly 20 years ago, and so they have a good 5 or 10 years of life left in them before you want them to be replaced. So that's not necessarily an immediate point of concern that I identified. They're operating well according to Kurt and Chip, and they're not necessarily something that need to, I mean, it's a big project too to do boilers. You don't want to go after that unless you really have to. So those are in good shape. Okay, starting in the basement, the fitness areas in particular is the first place I want to look at. And I'm bringing this up so folks can see in greater detail the areas that I'm talking about. The weight room and the 2 cardio exercise spaces in the office in between. Next slide. Some photos showing the existing conditions. This is a unit ventilator in the ceiling. It's the only source of heat and fresh air. This is the only sort of cooling you have in all those spaces. It's a window AC unit. The other one has been boarded up and covered up. So it's a big point of immediate need. Another space is the doors between the two locker rooms on the east side of the school. This is a steam cabinet unit heater, and it's got a perpetual leak on the fitting right down the bottom. And one of the things I noticed when I walked around is that there are no isolation or shut-off valves on any of the heating equipment. And the only way for Kurt and his team and Chip, for them to service this equipment is to shut down the boiler plant completely when students aren't here or when it's unoccupied, and have someone come in and fix that. Remarkably inefficient, remarkably costly. And so taking the time to install shut-off valves on that would be very, very useful for the immediate future of the space. In addition to that, you'll notice that the condensate return piping goes right down into the concrete. It's probably, as long as that leak's been happening, been corroding continuously, which poses a significant concern of leaking. And the only way to get to that is to sock up the floor and just keep cutting back until you can identify that the pipe is in good enough shape to keep it in place. So converting that to hot water, maybe that might be something you want to look into.
Are there others of those units in the building besides that one?
There are other steam cabinet unit heaters, but none that I noticed or was aware of that are leaking like that. Yeah. So moving up onto the main level, the second floor here, looking at the junior high wood shop. That's the only source of heating in the entire space. Easily past its service life and original to the space. This is the dust collector, which, as I understand, has had at least one fire in it. And as Jeff had mentioned, there's significant air quality issues with that system, so that would definitely want to be replaced as well for the safety of the students. Looking at the air handling unit that serves the band room space here. Moving in, it currently does not. It's a constant volume unit, multi-zone. It doesn't have any dehumidification to it. This is the ductwork configuration and how you service it. This is, again, the only source of cooling in the entire space is a window AC unit in the teacher's classroom. So providing dehumidification would, and a variable volume unit would greatly increase the comfort in that space and provide much better control of ventilation as well. I'm not sure if you're aware of this. Can you go back a slide, Kevin? The cafeteria is currently served by two different air handling units. They are independently controlled, one of which, to my understanding, barely functions at all and is very, very hard to keep going. It's really not an acceptable method of conditioning and ventilating your space. So I would recommend that you call it rezoning, would be the technical term, but you basically pull all the ductwork out and you put a new unit that serves that space, dedicated to it specifically. The other thing that does is it changes the zone or the spaces that the air handling unit number 8 serves, and that is also a unit that is well past its life and is something that's a continuous headache for Kurt to resolve and deal with. Okay, and then boardroom and staff lounge, where we are now. We poked our heads up above the ceiling here when we were here last week, and there currently is no outside air being ducted into this unit. So it used to come in through the old unit ventilators on the wall here, but that's been closed off. So all that's up there is just recirculating air and cooling it down.
And if anybody needs to know why it's been closed off, it's a lot because of functionality when it comes to being able to
Yeah,
conduct anything.
just because it's too loud, has other issues, yeah, comfort issues. Moving up to the third floor, the fax classroom areas, these have been touched on several times, but they currently all have unit ventilators, all controlled independently of one another. There is no dehumidification whatsoever, and have a lot of service calls for heating and discomfort issues in those spaces. So putting those all in one unit would make a lot of sense for the students and teachers in those spaces. Plus, I believe there's an office space or storage room that has absolutely no ventilation whatsoever. A couple office spaces in the middle of the third floor here. This is currently used as a teacher's office. It's probably a storage room at one point, but this is the only source of ventilation to the space. It's actually an exhaust grill. It's controlled by a wall switch, so that's very, very inadequate, and it's really hard to spend a significant amount of time in there without feeling groggy from CO2 concentrations and other things like that. And then, just went back when Jeff touched on this, but the indoor air quality issues with high CO2 levels on the fourth floor as well as on the third floor. What's the word? That would trigger the need to basically recommission the units that serve those spaces, which you bring service technicians in and they rebalance the outside air flows, they make sure all the air is in CFM is getting to the right level as it's supposed to be, and should help address the indoor air quality issues in those spaces. All right, just a little bit on plumbing. You guys have some really, really old pipes in this building. It's been a real chore to service them, and when you have needed to, it's often required repairing much more than you were originally expecting, because the walls of the pipe have gotten so thin that you can't adequately weld to it.
Right.
And so you have to cut it back far enough to the point where it hasn't degraded to that point, and it can be, a factor of whatever multiple you want to choose beyond the initial budget. Plus, insulation is just falling off everywhere. There's asbestos issues to deal with. Plus, a lot of your piping is encased in concrete in the floor, and so it's not serviceable. It's a good chance that you're losing a lot of water. I know that you are through your steam system, losing 55,000 gallons of water in the last year in the boiler system. And you can't repair the piping that's going through right now. The recommendation to upgrade a lot of your HVAC systems and provide dehumidification for your students will likely trigger the need to increase the size of your electrical service. That probably was not accounted for when electrical transformer and service was sized for this facility, and so that will cascade all the way back probably to the main service of your school and the facility here. And most of what I'm showing you here is all original electrical equipment that's far, far beyond code allowable technology. Just a brief summary here, kind of touching on 5 major points. Upgrading the HVAC equipment as I outlined, the diagonal hatched spaces, which will likely trigger upgrading electrical service and breaker panels and whatnot down the basement. Installing isolation valves on your heating equipment so you can service them without shutting down the boiler plant. That will be a very, very positive benefit for the maintenance personnel. Converting existing controls from pneumatic to DDC. The school's pretty much a black box for Kurt. There are a few systems right now that are on DDC controls that he can access remotely and can control, but for the most part, it's wall-mounted thermostats. He has no idea. Temperatures range from 65 degrees to 79 degrees throughout the school, and that's pretty unacceptable. It's far exceeds ASHRAE's allowable limits for comfort for a school of this, well, for occupants of this type in the school. Plus, it gets it to a network that he can access remotely. So he could be over at Trailview and say he gets a call for heat or cooling, or there's some issue that comes up, he could jump on his cell phone and look at that system and be able to change settings from that point. And what we would recommend would be the same control system that was recently installed on the Trailview School and the Wellness Center. Replacing as much of the domestic water supply piping as you can get your hands on, just primarily getting it up out of the concrete, but then also to mitigate any lead-based solder that's leaching into the water, and any other leakage issues that are creating moisture and mold problems and ceilings that can mitigate a lot of those problems. And then rebalancing and recommissioning your HVAC systems that got the indoor air quality issues. So that would be the highest priority things to do in the immediate short term for this school if you're going to stay here for the immediate future. It's certainly just the tip of the iceberg, as someone has said earlier tonight. There's a lot more items that would need to be addressed after a 3 to 5 year window.
Did you happen to look at sewer systems at all? I mean, we're looking at the quality of water coming in, but then the loss of water going out. One of the things that I heard being on the Buildings and Ground Committee is that the sewer lines leaving this building, the bottoms have deteriorated out to the point where they can't be cleaned anymore, they can't be serviced. Did you get a chance or do anything or can speak to that at all?
I can't directly as to what I looked at last week, but you could make the conjecture that a lot of the pipe is in similar condition and is very, very hard to service. Yeah. Whether or not it warrants an immediate remedy, I'm not sure. I don't know if they're keeping track of the domestic water that's coming in and out of the school at all, but yeah, it's definitely an issue, potential issue.
I have a question. 55,000 gallons in the last year. Where do you think that went?
My guess is that it's being lost through the condensate coming back to the boiler. It's probably going into the ground, being that you're not finding any leaks around the school, in the ceiling or in the walls or something like that. Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the interconnectedness of plumbing systems generally as an engineer and modifications to toilet facilities, infrastructure throughout the building for sinks and whatnot? In other words, if it's a very old building, the existing piping may not be up to code in terms of its volume capacity.
Oh yeah, that's very true. Plumbing code has changed since the initial construction of all the wings of this school, and so it's very possible that the current size and capacity of the plumbing piping is not large enough by today's code to handle.
So if we were to replace or to make a ADA compliant restroom, putting in a new toilet, for example, and replumbing that, we could run into not just making one room, but then having to fix all the plumbing that's connected to it, or come up to code with the plumbing that's connected.
I don't know if that would trigger the entire rest of the plumbing system to be resized.
Certainly would if we were renovating bathrooms.
Yes.
We're gonna renovate them for ADA, which means now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna not only look at the domestic water piping and what has to come there, but also the size of the sewage lines leaving the space. And they could say that needs to be sized for 12-inch pipe, and you have a 4-inch pipe in there. Rip that all the way out, and it wouldn't be the whole building, but it would be anything that we're touching again. It's gonna go all the way back, so it's more saw cutting and other items to.
And I thought of that because that's what we had to do with Trailview. When we started doing the Trailview project, that coding had changed in just 20 years, to the point we had to bring in a mini excavator in the middle of that building and dig down and replace the.
And that was sort of a combination of not only adding additional capacity to that building, more students, but also the plumbing code changes from when the building was built. So you can see it come from both ends. Sure. No pun.
Well stated.
Any other questions?
Are we gonna speak to costs of these minimal things that is that coming or not?
Whereabouts are we on, for the HVAC approximate?
Approximately, if we're just looking at HVAC ventilation piece, not the plumbing, it's in the $4 million range.
How about the electrical?
The electrical upgrade not included?
Yeah, we got more to
Well,
add.
you're talking
Well, it's hard,
more millions for just the electrical.
that's the hard part, is once you look at one thing, it triggers another thing, and another thing, and another thing. And so when we're talking with the building committee, we gotta really start to look at all little aspects, and we'll try our best to have budgets to the best of our ability on those types of things.
But the 4 million you're attaching to these priorities that Cole just referenced at the end of,
But
that you think should be
only
done.
the HVAC,
Right.
not of the plumbing, not
Not
of the electric.
the electrical.
And there's more that come into that. We gotta tear into walls, and we gotta patch the walls. We gotta do asbestos removal before we go. There's a lot more to, when we give you a number, we gotta really work to capture all those.
This is the dilemma that a lot of districts get into is, let's say you're just going to do an HVAC project, which is pretty common. Let's get the air quality up to speed so we're not dealing with CO2, moisture, et cetera. So now you're gonna take the ceilings down, you're gonna replace the ductwork, you're gonna move everything out of the room. Are you gonna put the room back together exactly like it was if you know it doesn't function for the educational purpose? So then a lot of districts go, well, no, we should probably, if we're in the fax room doing that, should we upgrade that? Okay, now you're renovating fax, and now the code starts to say, oh, while you're in there, you're gonna now start to deal with some of your ADA issues. If you just stick to the HVAC, they might not trigger the ADA, but it's the looking at where do you stop as you start doing some of these things? What's the intent that you want to go to? And that's really the dilemma that most districts get into is, if we're taking it all apart, are we putting it back together in a non-functional way, or isn't time to address some of those issues?
And then as those costs increase, they start to get to that point of the replacement cost, and then what we could actually do with the new space versus trying to make an old space work for our students.
Good. I think it was a hard question to answer. What's the return on investment? And it threw me for a loop because when we typically talk return on investment, you're measuring an energy performance project. But if you are saying what's the return on investment for an entire building, it doesn't really work that way because you have to start looking at some different factors. You could certainly look at energy, but when you look at energy, is just replacing the windows going to be a payback if your mechanical systems aren't energy efficient, or if you don't have the right insulation in your roof or your walls? Then you can start to get into what's lost. If you're losing 55,000 gallons of water a year due to your system, what's that return on investment? Then you can start moving into the subjective pieces, and there's a number of studies around student performance related to daylighting, air quality, acoustics, the number of different factors that you can have as a constant and measure and say, are student test scores higher in rooms with appropriate daylighting or without? Are they higher with appropriate ventilation or without? Then you get into things that work against that. If you're bringing more fresh air into the building, that also means you're spending more energy to come into the building to do that. So it starts to balance out the other way. And then unfortunately it gets down into the cost of the things that you hope you never have to deal with in terms of human life, when you're talking secure entrances, security issues. You know, you can say, well, we've never had a problem before. Is one life the right cost for that? You know, if nobody's ever been hit in front of the building. Do you wait for that to happen, or you say that's where it is? And those are the most extreme subjective pieces that you're measuring. So I'm not sure that there's a good way to answer that return on investment question. And sitting here thinking about that going, well, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. But that's sort of the myriad of issues that you start to deal with when you're looking at this.
And as your way out, whether you go for a referendum again, the tax impact of that versus the tax impact of a Plan B, that's where you're going, right? What's the best taxpayer value? I think I know that answer to myself, but I don't live here. We're gonna do the best we can and put the right information for your community to make those decisions. But it'll be clear tax value of each of those options. And I think that's part of that, you know, what's the best financial long-term investment, what's the best payback? I think when you look at those types of pieces of information, when we get all this pulled together, I hope it'll answer that question for, you know, for folks about that, because I think that's what, plus other things come into play on that. State helps pick up the share of something here, they don't help pick up the share of something here, and I think there's a lot that really come into play when you're really trying to figure this out.
It is, I mean, you start looking at these dollars and the amount that the local taxpayer is going to shoulder of this type of project, it's gonna be 100%. And if we can get a referendum passed, it spreads it out, and it doesn't all fall right on our local tax base.
That's correct. Yeah, and then you hear, there's things that are covered in what Cole's talking about, but there's not everything. There's gonna be another wave of things that are at useful life, and then the boilers are coming. Right?
We got 5 years. There's a B and a C and a
There's
D
a C.
and a D.
Yeah, there is, right?
I mean, really,
It doesn't.
if we go this way, there's a B and
got
a
it,
C and a D.
got
We're
it.
talking millions and a millions and a millions and a millions.
And there always is, no matter what you're talking about, whether you're talking about your car, your house, anything, it has a life cycle expectancy to it. So getting back again to the return on investment piece is, what's the best way to spend investment monies on maintaining what you have? And at what point do you say, what we're putting into what we have is beyond the use of what we'd be spending if we were working with something that's of a newer life cycle of a different system? And it's a very subjective thing. Every community has to decide at what point is that the level of reinvestment that you make versus a different type of investment.
Let's keep going. We got a couple more folks to listen to.
Thank you,
real quick,
Paul.
and I think you'll find helpful.
Jackie's gonna talk.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello. You're on.
Obviously, Brad Kramer with RJ Mechanical. Don't know most of you. I've done a pretty good job of keeping a low profile in this community. It's time for that to change, I guess. We've completed over 250 school projects since we started this business, probably totaling $600–700 million. I started as a shop kid, went through apprenticeship, became a pipe fitter, got involved with RJ, been president for 16 years. We average 100-some employees. We work all over the state of Minnesota, Wisconsin, South Dakota, and North Dakota. If there's pipes to be put in, we want to be there.
And we really like it when RJ Mechanical bids on our projects because we know we're going to get a good contract to do it. So they're one of the contractors that bids a lot of our school.
I was feeling a connection. I have pictures of urinals on my phone too. But then he said
We gotta talk now.
But then he said 1973 was a long time ago, and I'm like, that's when I was born.
I'm on Medicare. I got the floor one.
Cole covered most of the topics that I'm interested in, but I'd just like to reiterate some of the things. You know, he's talking about steam leaks being under the floor. If someone can show me how to find them, we'll make a killing doing that around the country. I mean, it's hit and miss. You start cutting, you start digging. As soon as you find one, you find three more. I mean, you asked the question earlier, where do we start? You know, it's kind of the plan for tonight. That's not the question. Where do you stop? You can't. You get into domestic water piping, you want to eliminate the lead. You can't just take out a third of it and eliminate the lead. You have to get rid of all of it. You don't get rid of the lead by taking out pieces. The heating systems, you know, you can start replacing part of the steam. Right now, your boilers are in good shape. They've been maintained. You walk down there and you think they're almost brand new. I mean, they've really been taken care of. But if you put in part of a new system, you connect that new system to your old system. It's very difficult to maintain your old system with how long it's been in service and how corroded is not the right word, but the system's corroded. It's infected, let's say that. So now you put this new part on it, it's immediately infected with your old stuff. So now you just reduce the life of your new stuff already. So to piece things together, it can be done. Anything's possible. There's a cost associated with it, but is it the right decision? I don't see an end. And if Plan B goes, if it goes, you'll drive by here and it'll look just like it did before it started. And people will wonder what happened to the money. And I know you guys will bust your butt trying to convince the community, and I don't know. I'm here to help and answer questions. I mean,
Say we wanted to contract RJ, get rid of the lead. I mean, that just seems awful. We worry about that. It's a real worry for us. What's the likelihood that you could be able to even do that with the plumbing that's running through the cement walls and floors? And anything's possible, I understand, but it would have to be a daunting.
It would be. So, obviously, if you did it in phases, you'd go in and cut out so much a year and do whatever you did if it's a summer phase. But again, your plumbing pipes, I mean, how many, you probably have 5 miles of plumbing pipes in this building. You probably can see half a mile of it. The rest of it's encapsulated inside walls, ceilings, floors. So you're pretty much cutting holes in every room, wherever there's plumbing fixtures. The ADA toilets, if you need to make one ADA toilet, you're redoing that whole bathroom. Because you just affected this one, and this one, and this one. So none of them meet code until you got the room on and start over. And it doesn't stop. But I walked the building with Cole and the other guys too.
Enough said. I mean, I don't know much about all this stuff, but I've got 2 pages of notes and I look at it, just go.
I make a living doing what you guys are thinking about doing.
Yeah, you can't
I don't want to spend my
oversimplify this
tax
stuff.
dollars doing that.
We don't either, but
Right.
we're kind of getting backed into a corner.
I understand the position you're in. And
You know, when you hear about the air quality on the 4th floor in any classroom in this building, it's just, you can't go on.
You're a very large taxpayer again. Will you say what you just said? You are a very large taxpayer in our community, and what did you say?
I said I make a killing doing this kind of work that you're looking at doing. Make my living, I should say killing. Make a good living. But I don't want to spend my tax dollars that way.
Thank you.
It
Doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense in a.
You know, I know these guys try, and you know, I deal with schools all over the state. Edina is one of my favorite ones to talk about. They spend $10 million every few years going in and replacing parts of a building. Well, you were talking about A, B, C, D, and E. Well, we're already back to A, our 3rd time. I've been in some of them schools in the last 25 years. I couldn't tell you how many times.
And
We replaced boilers
I
so many
can add
times.
to that, since we're doing the work in Edina, there's areas that you wanna feel equal to Edina, we can push the pencil through some of the piping in the walls in Edina, cause it's so old, but they don't have any space in Edina to build new buildings. So when we evaluated with them, how do you wanna do this? They didn't have options other than to invest in the buildings, and it's going back in and saying, well, we're gonna have to keep putting money into these buildings over the years because there's no place to build a new high school yet, there's no place to build new elementary schools there. And it's like that all over the metro, and so your question of, how do communities deal with this, in the metro area, you don't have many options.
We do.
Yeah.
You know,
We've acquired property to do
I only
it.
picked their name because everyone associates Edina with money.
Yeah. Well, and then there's two parts of A, they don't have a spot to build, but it's also they're one of the top 25, so they can levy, they don't have the same constraints we do. They can just do it. They can just do it.
They
They
have more
can
square
save
feet
money.
students, so their capital availability for LTFM is a little bit higher.
And
Yeah.
they test like on a monthly basis for lead
Yeah.
in different areas. When they find a speck of lead somewhere, man, they're calling us instantly, get down here today and get rid of whatever's causing this. And it's not, I mean, it's Wayzata, it's Eden Prairie, Edina, I mean, you can go down the list. It just, once one person associates getting sick, no one has yet, but once one person gets sick and blames it on lead, the list is gonna pile up so fast.
So, St. Paul Schools has been in the news a lot for their cost overages and their projects. I spent some time talking with the superintendent, facilities director.
That was on camera.
And I said, what do you think about this? And he said, this is all stuff that has to be done. This isn't over budget. This is us being in the buildings and saying, where do you stop? You can't stop doing this stuff, and we're gonna have to keep continuing to do it. If anything, we're gonna raise our budgets to match this. We're not gonna be able to scale back on what we do.
And that's my other concern with this, is we talk about a budget. We talk about coming up with, okay, we're gonna spend X amount of money. We can't even do that, because once we start into this, it turns into what comes next to go beyond it. There's no good way to encapsulate this into a project.
No, because you're spending, well, if you say you're gonna spend 10 million next year, it's gonna be 50 to 60 before you're done.
Right. And you know that going into it, but you don't know that. I mean, you can't say which part it is gonna be. You know what's gonna happen, but you don't know is it gonna be that you're saw cutting through so much concrete or whatever you find through a wall.
When you're, sorry, just pipe in here, you're lucky if when you cut a hole in the floor, it doesn't cause structural problems. You know, if there's a lot of the old building here that's still made out of wood, you cut things off of it, fire marshal's gonna say, well, you gotta do something about that. Structural engineer's gonna get involved and say, this is under capacity, you gotta reinforce. So there are other items that we're not really hitting on because we're trying to hit what are your priority one issues.
But we have had that discussion when we talk about renovating. That's entirely
But
possible.
this is a different, I mean, renovating is one thing. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is trying to get indoor air quality better. It's not changing educational space or adequacy or making a commons area.
But I'm talking about the proverbial can of worms,
Right,
maybe opening if you cut into anything.
And like you said, you dump all that money in, you drive by it, you never see it. The taxpayer money you'd never notice it from looking at the building.
Just to find your condensate leaks on your boiler systems could be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yep. And then what kind of structural problems are you gonna find from 55,000 gallons of water leaking through every year underneath that you're gonna have to fix once you find it?
Suppose you were just talking about floor covering, et cetera, and if you're digging in and up and underneath, well, when if ever are you gonna change a floor covering and say, well, that's when you're gonna do it. Same with the walls, geez, we're gonna bring this up. That only makes sense, you're gonna have a cost of going in and a cost of coming back.
You find you're taking steps to protect carpet that's 20 years old.
Yeah.
Put it, covering down on it and saying, well, we better not ruin this carpet because we're not putting new carpet in.
Yeah.
And patching and matching, good luck.
Yeah.
Or beyond,
Yeah.
or beyond interior decorating.
Right. And we all know that, again, that's further down the list, but at the same time, that is, the sense comes in to say, God, if you're ever gonna do this is when you do it, So, same with the boilers, same with everything, so you have everything that you worded very good at, you infected the system, saying you don't have to do it now, but you would want to, you would need to do it
Yeah, you become so inefficient because, you know, you only have this much to spend right now.
Yeah.
So you have to stop.
Yeah.
Now it costs you twice as much to do what you should have did.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I've lived in Mora for, I don't even know how many years now, but I think part of the struggle is people, you know, you throw out these large numbers, 40 million, 60 million. Most people obviously have never spent $1 million in their life. Never will spend $1 million in their life. So they hear this huge number and there's no way anything should be that expensive. I could buy the house of my dreams for $1 million. And they could. But the concept or the grasp of that dollar value, I think, is one of the real struggles. They don't realize what things cost. You know, if I told them it would cost $4 million to redo the mechanical system, they'd call me nuts. Reality, I see it every single day.
You're the
We do.
professional.
I'm not alone, but that's reality.
It's reality, and I was just gonna say that it's not that we're sitting here trying to use manipulation or threats or anything. It's just the reality we've been dealing with.
Right.
And you're a little bitter.
Not always, but yeah. So that's, I don't know if you have any questions or.
Oh, we appreciate your expertise. Thank you.
You guys, I'm in town, so. If you have questions. So, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Chip?
I'll stay back here. You know where we stand. Kurt's been doing an amazing job piecing together what he can. We've heard the stories. Kurt goes home and finds parts in his yard to come and fix some of our equipment that we have because we can't get the parts anymore. We're way beyond belts and grease and general maintenance on our HVAC. I have so many concerns, and quite frankly, it's embarrassing to take phone calls from teachers. I'm freezing cold. Next door neighbors, hotter than son of a gun, and we can't do anything about it. My job isn't very easy. I try to put up fires all day long, but something needs to be done. And I want to make sure the public knows that if we do a plan B, it's not just going to be one little phase and we're done. That's the tip of the iceberg, and we're going to pay through the teeth on our taxes, and it's not fair to our kids. And that, like you mentioned before, you do one little piece, driving by the street, you're not going to notice a thing. Our kids will notice that it'll be better breathing, it'll be warmer and be cooler and whatever we need, but aesthetically, this place is a dump, and we need to do something now. So I'm excited that we are kind of looking at Plan B because something's got to get done. We can't Band-Aid this place anymore. It's really ridiculous. So I know we're frustrated, and I get that, but
There's no other way to say it though, but it's time, we gotta move on.
I don't understand the community that doesn't support the school. That just makes no sense to me. My dad's in education. I pay taxes. When I'm done and retired, I'm gonna continue to pay taxes because it's what's best for our community and our kids. And if we have to do it non-voter approved levy and we pay it anyway, it is what it is. It just makes zero sense to me. But I know we're frustrated. Kurt gets the phone calls too. It's just I don't like coming to work sometimes. It's a nightmare. And it's not a weekly, it's not a monthly, it's a daily, it's an hourly nightmare to try to keep this place up and running. So.
I got a question. What would happen with this building? If you built a new school, what would happen with this building?
It's sitting on property that is marketable.
The building gets torn down.
The building is torn
down. Part of the referendum money would be
So bad that
to.
you couldn't get it to sell.
No, we would tear
no,
the
we would-
building.
Building would go.
It's gonna be, there's no question with the next referendum, part of that wording would be that this building would get torn down, so that the public would know that would be a guarantee in that spending.
So I understand that the building is already all paid for, correct?
The building is?
I understand that this facility is already paid for, the taxpayers have paid for it all.
Sure.
The only thing that we're paying for is repairs. So the new school, what would the cost be in that? If you went and built a whole new school, you gotta look at the fact that this is taxpayer dollars, and people don't look at that. We've all paid your salaries, we're paying their salaries in order to fix and build a new school.
We're taxpayers too. What salaries are you paying?
You're paying your salary, her
What
salary, you know, because you guys are getting paid for being on this committee, correct? I mean, the taxpayer dollars goes towards all that. We're trying to get a good answer for the whole community. That's what I'm asking, is
Okay,
why,
so, well,
where would this building go, what would happen with this building? Because it's been talked about going into apartments, senior housing.
The building
and you
itself
have
would be
the same
torn down.
problems.
The building itself would be torn down.
The structure would be torn down,
It would be bare land to be sold.
and that, the value is in the bare land.
And I guess the other question I have is, why isn't the courthouse is in such better shape than this? Has this been neglected for so many years? I mean, you're taking tax dollars from us to fix the building.
We have maintained the building as best we can with taxpayer dollars and keeping tax dollars to a minimum, or tax impact to a minimum, and maybe to a fault. Maybe we should have increased taxes for the last 20 years, a lot more, to do more repairs than what we did.
Well, that's where the communication has been bad.
Right, so I'm glad you're asking the question.
Yes.
I'm gonna answer a couple of questions for you about what would a new school be. About, last referendum was about 60 million. So now it'd be a little bit more to look at because of construction inflation. What would become this if it was demoed and sold? Would be the community to decide. Just when they sold Fairview and the land where Fairview was, you know, they didn't know it was gonna be a quick trip, right? A private developer might buy the land and build housing or see, who knows what, right? But it would be sold, typically, it would be sold for best use for the community. That's what would be typical.
Where would the proceeds from the sale of the building go?
Would go into the district's general fund. So like, for example, when they sold the land at Fairview, I believe it went into.
It went into our general fund, and then some of the, we've got about 955,000 sitting in a facilities maintenance fund, and some of that came from the sale. About 300,000 is what we netted out of the sale of Fairview. For instance, just in looking at the roof stuff, yep, we're sitting good right now, but they're coming up again. We need to set monies to the side, because we know in the next 10, 15, 20 years, we're gonna need to do the roofs again. Nobody did anything wrong, nobody didn't pay for anything, but we know it's coming. We have to do that. So if we can set that monies to the side, and every year, you know, you stick $250,000 or 300,000, whatever. Well, right now, we don't have that. We don't have that from the state. We only are allotted X number of dollars. That's what we come from. You know, if we build a new school, yep, there's going to be an annual payment. If we repair here, there's going to be an annual payment. It's less of an annual payment to build a new one than it is the numbers we'd be looking at to do repairs going forward on this. 60 million for a new school, a 44% state aid, that leaves us at a total cost of 33 million. Overall, it's about 2.1 million a year. If we're looking here at doing a $10, $11 million project payable over the next 2-3 years to fix the immediate things, that's a little over 3 million a year, which is less, 2.1 or 3, 2.1. Because in 3 years, we're gonna have to do another bite of the apple. That's another 10, 11 million.
That doesn't get state aid.
That doesn't get state aid, we're paying the
all
whole
on the
thing.
taxpayer, local taxpayers.
And we're still dealing with the same old.
And we're dealing with the same things of, where does it end? We don't know. It's not gonna be phase 1 and phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5, phase 6. We don't know when that's gonna end. If we build new, we know what we have. There is a budget, there is that dollar amount, that's all we got. And those are the things that we struggle with.
And we're in a good place compared to some districts in that we don't have to acquire land. We've had the land for going on 30 years.
school boards well
And
before us
no-
planned that that was gonna be their direction that the district goes.
And many have to buy real estate or buy more land before they can.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So a courthouse can be remodeled and renovated, a new jail can be built without taxpayer approval. Public schools have to go to a vote to do a major renovation, repair, new school, what have you. So public schools all around the state are at the mercy of the taxpayers to say, you know what, I think that's a good investment.
And plus, as a school district, as a school board, we're trying to get the taxpayer the best value. And that's why we keep coming back to plan, call it what you want, one plan or the other. The decision that we make as a school board is with that in mind.
In the courthouse that you brought up earlier, I worked for the county back then, and the way I remember it was that was on the historical, the state of Minnesota historical records, so therefore it had to be remodeled. The county could have opted out and remodeled and made that into like a museum, but the history center was already in place, so there wasn't a use for that, but the county would have still had to maintain that courthouse, even if they would have built out in the industrial park. The county had bought land out in the industrial park, and which is now the Mora Industrial Park. That's where the county was planning on building a new courthouse, and the county commissioners had voted on that and everything way back when. I was really young back then. So then they found out that it was on the historical, and then they had to change their plans and stuff. So that's the reason that was remodeled. And just so you know, about 2/3 of that building over there is all brand new. It was kind of encapsulated around the old, there's the 1896 part of it, then there was an 1852 part of it, and then the rest of it was new back in the early 90s.
Yeah. And here's the other piece of that. What's the volume of people coming in and out of this building every single day? Roughly.
Well, student counts between 950 and 1,000.
So in and out, at 1,000 people coming in and out multiple times every day. What do you think the number of people going in and out of the courthouse every day is? 50? So their maintenance, their use, the amount of actual wear and tear on the building is infinitesimally smaller than this building.
I think one of the things she brings up that I think is really important is the need to communicate to the community. Because one of the things I worry most here is you have authority to fix some of these things. You've been told to fix this stuff. You don't need a brand new school, just fix it. I'm afraid if you go and fix it, people are gonna say, my God, how come my taxes went way up?
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't you tell me it would be less to build a new? And I think that really is the importance of communicating this to the
In the
public.
perfect world,
Really important.
every taxpayer could see or hear from people that have the knowledge or expertise in each area of a building like this. I mean, the facts can't be disputed, and for some of the things that have been perpetuated throughout our past referendums to go on and just, just divisive type stuff being spewed that is not factual, it makes it really difficult. But we can't dispute what reality is.
And we have to live with it. You guys have to deal with it.
You hear it's a sham, you hear it's just, it can't be true, and we have the facts. And that's what we're basing decisions on all the time. So I don't know what else we can do to get information out except for, publicize things like this. This is a public meeting, it was an open meeting. And how many are here? It's wonderful, the room is almost full, but we've got a lot more citizenry and
That-
taxpayers that aren't
taxpayers.
here that would rather say, well, you know, why didn't you tell us? Well, we've tried for the last 8 years, 10 years. So we're just looking to get information out.
Yeah, so next steps. just-
Yes.
Look, we can wrap our part up, and I gotta tell you, the professionals have taken the time to come and walk through this and provide their opinions and help share us. I'll just tell you personally, everyone that's on our team, we renovate buildings. We renovate schools. We're proud of renovating schools. It's really a tough one for us to be working on Plan B here. I'm just gonna be honest. And I'm emotional about it because, you know, we are passionate for what we do. And we've had a lot of time with this gentleman to see what they've been keeping together. But we do have, on Monday, you have a special board meeting. You're considering whether or not you go again. for a referendum. That's-
Where was that at?
That's not, okay, so you have that option. But we do have a buildings and grounds committee meeting, building committee meeting on 18th to really finalize some of the scope and try to keep the lid down on this for taxpayers. Yet try to address our priorities of health and safety and so on. And then a board meeting on February 27th to approve Plan B, take action, and proceed forward with a Plan B. So, just some future dates we have coming for.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, and thank you to everybody for being here to present this information and provide us a lot to think about. So with that, I think we'll move into the second open forum. Would anybody like to address the board at this time further? Yes, Troy.
I just want to reiterate a couple of things that I had heard, and I appreciate Jeff bringing it up. And I've been sitting in on a lot of these meetings, and I went through the prioritization and all that stuff, and kind of just see where everything's going. And I think Plan B is biggest waste of financial funds we could do. But I also feel that if we don't have the Plan B in place, and if we don't have a good thought out way of doing Plan B, that we're fooling ourselves when we go out and we say, either we're gonna do this or you're gonna have this, you know. So, and with Plan B, with security being number one, health and safety, security being number one, it's going to be not having a parking lot over there. Because that's where someone's going to be killed. And when that happens, my program that I'm heavily invested in is going to be impacted greatly. So I just want to make sure that that impact that we're going to be feeling is being addressed or being at least known about, so that we have the plan in place, so we know going forward if we have a football place to play football in this town, or if football is something we're no longer going to play in this town. Because we can't do it with just a parking lot put there and a game field there as a grass game field. We can't.
That's what I said to Yvonne when we were talking more about the parking, but the green space or the land that we have here, it's tight.
I understand, but
I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just saying, I'm well aware that that is an issue, and it does us no good to make the kids travel somewhere else to do practice or to play football or whatever. We've just got a lot of things to hash out here I'm not disagreeing with what you said, I agree.
You know, so I mean, however it gets played out or however it happens, again, I want a referendum passed. I want to, you know, I'm a alumnus here, and parents graduate from here, and that. But the new building is the only way it makes any sense to me in my mind. But for 10 years, 8 years, whatever, our community's been telling us a new building isn't the best way of doing it. So at some point, we have to either say, okay, something has to be done in the near future, one way or the other, whether it's the new building or it's this Plan B. And so however it happens, I just want to be on the front end of it and not caught behind or have other, things not thought through as we go forward. So, thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else? I jumped the gun. We need to back up future meeting dates. We have a consensus that we should move forward with a meeting Monday night. Okay, so that will be posted then. There will be a special board meeting at 5 o'clock on Monday, date's February 10th.
It's just for the record, I can't attend.
Oh, yeah.
Should be on a quorum.
Yeah.
To make some decisions, so. Okay. All right. With that, we will stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.